I have to go to bed.
Right, I think we're live, guys. So let's get the show on the road.
All right.
Um, Sweet. So let's just do our intros real quick. We have our special guest, Ari Lerner. Say hi, Ari.
Hi, Ari. Hey
Nice.
guys. Thanks for inviting me here.
We're totally happy to have you here. We're excited to chat about staying up with Angular. It's going to be great. And as always, I'm Kent C. Dodds and Todd Moto, my co-host.
Motto. We've done this 4 times now.
Oh
And
my
still can't.
gosh, I'm so sorry, Todd. That's so embarrassing. Could we not broadcast that? Oh shoot, we're live. Dang it.
Well, if everyone else will play along, I'm glad to start that over.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hi everyone.
Hi everyone. Welcome back to NG. I'll take it. I'll take it, guys.
Yeah. We have a new co-host. 3 co-hosts. That would be interesting. Okay, so we do have something new this episode though that we're excited about. We have a sponsor, ReactWeek.com. This is run by a couple guys here in Utah, and it's awesome. So Ryan Florence, if you don't know who that is, that guy is a genius and a half with React, and he's going to be talking about React.js, Flex, React Router, who he's the core contributor of, Firebase, and Webpack. And all these things put together make a beautiful app using React. And the tickets go on sale on the 23rd. I actually forgot to look up how much those tickets are, but if you just go to reactweek.com, you should be able to get all the information that you need. And that is the week of March 9th to March 13th. So React Week, go check it out. And then also, we invite you to tune in for our next show, January 27th, with the ngconf organizers. We're totally stoked to have a couple of the organizers there. We're going to talk about the Angular community and what it's like to organize a conference like ngconf. And as always, remember to ask questions on our Google Moderator. You can find that on ngair.github.io, our website. And then follow us on Twitter and Google Plus at AngularAir. So that's our general announcement. So we can go ahead and get started. Take it away, Todd.
Cool. Hey everybody. First off, thanks Ari for coming on the show. Great to have you. I've actually read your book, so I can honestly say that. And normally I have to make that up for other people. Just kidding.
Well,
So
the question is, which one? Do you read the one in Chinese? That's a pretty good one.
yeah, I actually read that. I found it a lot easier. So we all have quite an interesting story to tell of how we initially got started with Angular. So we wanted to kind of know how you got into Angular, why you got into Angular, and sort of what happened, and was it a first framework choice, or did it evolve from a new framework, or did you change sort of a server-side technology and go full-on sort of client-side? Or so yeah, let us know.
Sure, that's a good place to start. So actually, most of my professional career has been spent on the back end. I did a lot of work. I used to work for a really large company here in America, and I did a lot of work on their cloud infrastructure. And I built a lot of their front-end API developer program work, and did kind of a lot of work on their routing and pretty much only back-end logic. And I spent most of my career there. I did when I left that company, I was there for kind of a long time. I felt like I made a really good impact, and I left that company. I had really only known at that point only a couple frameworks, and Backbone was the one I was using primarily at the time. And I was particularly not excited about all the work that I had to do with Backbone. So when I left that company, I was working. I made a choice to kind of move away from Backbone and look at the other technologies out there. Maybe 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. No, it was about 2.5 years ago. I started looking at other frameworks. Knockout was in there to name. Knockout, Ember. This is Ember pre 1.0. And I just ended up on Angular as kind of this like grand sweeping overview of the frameworks of the time, and everything just kind of felt right. So I started working more and more with Angular, and I kind of fell in love with the ideas behind it.
Cool. And how long ago was that? Like, when did you start doing Angular?
I think 2.5 years ago, maybe almost 3 years ago.
So you were definitely a pre 1.0
Oh
Angular user?
yeah, yeah, I was, yeah. When documentation was really, really terrible.
Hmm.
Cool. So, what is, well, I guess we can kind of dive into some of this ngbook stuff. So, can you tell us what ngbook is and why you decided to write it, and when you first published ngbook?
Sure. Um, at the time that I was making the choice to leave that large company that I was talking about, I had just completed a course by Amy Hoy, and Amy Hoy's it's her bootstrapping course, and without giving too much away, because it's a fantastic course that I highly recommend you take it um, if you if you are interested in bootstrapping a business. I just kind of finished that. I had gotten it as a present from a friend of mine. Someone had purchased it for me, and so I went through that course, and a lot of that course talks about education and educational materials. And at the, I didn't actually connect the dots that I wanted to be an educational material writer when I was at that company. When I left, I went and started teaching. At a JavaScript school here in San Francisco called Hack Reactor, and that's kind of when I fell in love with teaching. And at the same time, in the background, actually, I taught there's a bunch of schools here in San Francisco, and I kind of went through the rounds and volunteered at some and taught at others, and I ended up on a Hack Reactor and just really loved it. So at the same time that I was teaching, I noticed that in order to learn Angular at the time, I was walking through the source code and kind of debugging things and seeing how things were working, and connected the dots one day and was like, well, shoot, I should probably just write an intro guide to Angular for actually, it didn't even start out that way. I started out wanting to teach my roommate Angular and convince him why it was really exciting. So I started teaching him, and I was like, I'm just going to codify this and write this into like a 30-page, maybe 50-page book, little manual with pictures. I can probably get up to 50 pages with pictures. So
That's
I started,
awesome.
and then at some point I got to 60 pages. I was like, maybe I'll turn this into a cookbook, because I'm like finding out different ways to do different things that I've done before in Backbone. And about 600 pages later, it was like, okay, I should probably actually just call it what it is, and round out the corners and round out the rough edges, and actually just make it into an actual resource.
Well, that's a big leap from 60 pages to 600 pages.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Like, how did you get to the, like, did you just do this on your spare time, or when did you really start to think, oh, this is like a thing that I really want to do, and that other people more than just my roommate can really benefit from?
I think so. I didn't just start looking through the source code and writing Angular apps. Like that, as much as sometimes I'd really like to exist in a bubble, life doesn't always work like that. So I was trying to participate in the community at the time. The community was pretty small, and a lot of people in the community were asking very similar questions to each other, and everyone who started Angular at the time started with the same question, like started with very similar questions. And so kind of at that point, that's when it was maybe about 100 pages in. I was like, I really actually should make this a legitimate effort and try to build a community resource. And at the time, I was teaching relatively full time. It wasn't full time officially, but I was there 4 or 5 days of the week, and then the rest of the time I was consulting. I was doing a lot of other big business consulting, mostly back-end work, which slowly migrated to front-end as I did more and more Angular work. So most of that time was spent spare time. There was about 2 weeks in there when I put my head down, I closed off one contract, and I wrote. And I just kept writing. I got maybe 300 pages out of those 2 weeks.
Wow, that's awesome. So, what what is ngBook? Like, is it? You mentioned that it was kind of like a cookbook. Is that, or that at one point it had been? Is that kind of what ngBook is now, or is it like a huge documentation? Or,
right.
Like, how would you describe ngBook?
So ngBook is like the canonical resource for Angular. And I really like saying that because it did start exactly what you just said. It started out as a cookbook. And cookbooks are they're very specific. And this was like a cookbook through the generation of a single app. And that slowly migrated out of the book into becoming hardcore documentation and reference. So you still get both of those flavors in the book itself. You get this is how you do specific things inside of Angular, and then it also included, ended up being like I said, like a reference for the book. So the book itself covers a lot of things. I put a lot of work into being as thorough as possible on the parts of Angular that are really specific, on the parts of Angular that at least the Angular 1.x series won't change. Things like controllers, and the directives chapter is a huge chapter, routing chapter is a huge chapter, testing has another huge chapter. Those things at the time, and still today, I don't expect those things to change very much. And so that's why I put kind of a lot of time into doing the reference side of that. Whereas the things that I did expect to change, again, at the time, the more things that I expected to change, like how do you get started with Angular, was at the time a big question that gets asked, and it's still a really large question that gets asked. Those things I put less time into the actual documentation and more time into the story. So ngBook itself is a 600 and anywhere between 25 and 50 page book, depending on which version you have of the book. That's actually something that I should probably mention, that it's actually an ongoing effort. As Angular changes and as our experience with Angular changes, the book itself is constantly updated. And this is the digital version of the book. We sell it both on Amazon as well as through ngbook.com. And it's really hard to update Amazon. It's really hard to update like a paper version of the book, so that obviously lags behind. Yeah, so it's largely a big reference to Angular with a thread of a story walking through it.
And you mentioned like changes and stuff. How often were Angular changes affecting the book as you were kind of putting it together?
When I was so the book itself took probably about 4.5 months of writing, including those 2 weeks. And it took a little bit, it probably took about a month of editing. And so in those 5 months, Angular didn't change as much. If I was writing that same book today, it would be a much different experience. But because at the time, Angular was just coming out with 1.0 at that time when I started writing the book, or when I was getting close to actually turning it into a book. At the time, it wasn't changing as rapidly as it is now. So it's changing a lot more, and there's also a lot of speculation now about Angular 2.0. So the book itself likely wouldn't have covered as much if I started that today.
Yeah.
So at the time, the one thing that it did affect was I didn't write. I noticed there were parts of Angular that started to phase out, such as oh, holy cow, just lost it. Like such as automatic scope, automatic promise dereferencing, where you could reference the result of a promise by setting a variable equal to that result. Um, when I started, that was the way of doing things in Angular. When I started writing the book, that was the way of doing things in Angular, and that started to phase out. So at the time, I was like, oh, I should actually really pay attention to the things that will change and be removed from Angular. And so if anything, it kind of made me more cognizant of the fact that I needed to write only on the things that really mattered, and the only things that really mattered to Angular and actual Angular developers.
Yeah.
So how frequently do you release new versions?
Every day.
Right. Pre 1.3, the book itself now covers 1.3. The large is from 1.3. Before that, it was weekly. I would release micro updates. Those are a lot of that had to do with like maybe I misspelled a sentence, or I had two A's in, I had some grammatical errors or typos. A lot in the beginning was fixing those and making it more presentational and actually like turning it into something that I was proud of rather than something that just needed to be released. And so that lasted for, I don't know, maybe like 2 months of just releasing micro updates almost daily, actually. As Angular changes now, as there's like larger and larger updates, I'm sorry, I collapsed two sentences that I wanted to say into one. As Angular is updating now, we generally tend to stick with the same theme of updating the book with large changes, things that will actually affect developers and actually affect our work when we're working with Angular. Those are the things that get wrapped into the book. Otherwise, smaller things we tend to leave those by the wayside, depending on how many people it will likely affect. Like we have a lot of people who have purchased the book who use the book from 1.2, and we have a lot of people who use the book for 1.3, and we can't, in order to cover everybody, we can't make huge changes to the book, and we can't cut things out of the book because people are still depending on, the 1.1 features.
Oh, that's interesting. So you have to make your book backward compatible.
Yeah, in some ways I feel like I'm like Microsoft's 1995. Maybe 1998 is probably better. Like Windows Me was terrible for that reason. But that's a lot of it feels good in that way because we have cut things out in the past and had to put them back in. And it feels good because what that indicates to us, what that tells me, is that people are actually using it and actually making it a part of their development cycle. And that's, one of the things I really like about teaching is that eye-opening moment when, if I'm teaching software, or even if I'm teaching, teaching math is another thing that I like to teach. Like that eye-opening moment where you're like, oh, I see it. Like that's what I go for. That's why that's the thing that I like about teaching. That's like one of the things that really affects me and my motivation. And so having people write me complaining angrily that I took out a section is validation that that's actually happening with the book.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's way cool that you release updates to the book. I'm curious, how do those updates get distributed to the readers? Like, do they have to download the new version, or like, and when they get the update, do they know what's changed? Do they have to read the 625 pages again so that they like know everything that's new? Like, how do those updates happen?
Sure, that's actually a really good question, and the answer is not. We haven't quite figured that all out quite yet. So what we have right now is we number the books. You have to re-download the book. We don't host a website with the book. We thought about that actually kind of a while ago I started writing an Angular site to actually just host the book and have it be an online reference so you could see what's the absolute, like the latest with Angular, and that turned into its own software project that I didn't particularly want to maintain, and I didn't really have the time to maintain it, specifically because I like teaching, and writing that software to support my teaching was actually taking away from the thing that I got into it in the first place. So I ended up kind of leaving that by the wayside. So in order to get an update, we send out emails with the update link. We use a service called Gumroad that hosts the book, and when we send out an update, we send out a link. Theoretically, Gumroad has gone through some changes with this. There is a link to go re-download the new files. And inside that email, we have this big change log. Everything that we change goes into that change log. So I think probably with the next iteration of the book, when the next major release comes out, we're probably going to include that change log as material inside the book. That's something we haven't done in the past. The way that you can see what has changed is a description in the changelog currently. Like I said, we're probably going to end up including that in the book, so you can see that. Another thing that we do specifically for 1.3, because it's such a big, it was a version number change between 1.2 and 1.3. In the book, we actually call out the 1.3 features as a 1.3 feature. So if you go through the book and you do a search, you can see the 1.3 feature, and you can see what's changed inside of there. And that's really the more referencey change, as opposed to the change log, which is, oh, I see, okay, so this part of Angular changed.
Cool. So what? I don't want to just keep going on NG book forever, because I do want to ask, and I know lots of our viewers want to know, like, how you actually keep up with all these changes that are happening in Angular. But we wanted to make sure to ask about Angular, like how long you expect to keep doing releases of the book and updates. Like, is this a forever project you're going to go through Angular 2.0, or are you getting tired, I guess? Like, how long is this going to keep going?
Sure. That's a great question. Actually, I'm really delighted you asked that, because we get asked that question often, and up until recently, we didn't really have an answer. It was kind of a big question in our minds, like how long could we keep doing this, and how long does it make sense for us to do it? And I think as long as I'm working professionally in Angular, as long as I'm working in it, I'm likely going to be contributing back to the book. A lot of my daily tasks right now are working in, I'm doing Android and iOS development, as well as some machine learning work. So I'm spending less time on Angular as I have in the past, but I'm still working on it. And so I answer that with that in mind, that like my work is now no longer just 100% Angular, but there's still Angular in there. And when things change, I am adding to our changelog, and I am adding issues to our book, and then I'm updating the book alongside these changes. Alongside those changes and the things that actually affect us when we're working on Angular today. As far as Angular 2.0 goes, it's such a significant shift. We have both ES6 to cover, AtScript to cover, and the Angular framework itself. I'm not entirely certain what the migration path for the book itself is, and I think what we've kind of settled on is writing an additional, not taking away from Angular 1.2 and 1.3 of NG book, but actually adding an additional resource on top of that. And because it is such a significant shift, I'm not entirely certain what that looks like for our readers today. What I can say is that we are working on that, and we're already starting on that. And because we have people who have purchased Angular 1.2 and 1.3 book, the plan is to take care of anyone who has the book today as we add the Angular 2.0 resource. And
That's so
again, I
funny.
don't know what that looks like, so we'll see.
The way that you say that is like exactly the response that we get whenever we talk to an Angular core team member about Angular 2, except they're not writing a book, they're actually writing the framework. But it's just like, we don't know what that looks like, and we are working on it. And so that's now my next question is it going to be an entire, like a total rewrite?
No. So like I said a few minutes ago, we have developers write us angrily when we remove things from the book, even things that are quote unquote wrong, things that like don't no longer work in Angular 1.3 that worked in 1.2. Because the book itself is an intertwined resource has become intertwined as a resource for professional developers today. We can't remove those. It's going to be the same. It's going to be the same with Angular 2.0. I don't foresee that changing, that we just delete sections of the book. And that's why I'm leaning. We're writing the book today, the Angular 2.0 book today, as a separate resource. So it's not going to be removed from Angular 1. Or ngbook 1.2 to 1.3. It's going to largely, my expectation is going to be an additional book, which makes me feel intimidated by just saying that. Writing a book is really hard, by the way. If you're thinking about writing a book, I'm telling you right now, your social life is going to go away, and your professional life is largely going to be focused on everything that you're writing in that book your life will just become that. Also, editing a book that you've written, not fun.
Wise words.
Maybe foolish words, because I can give that recommendation.
So you're going to be writing the book alongside the 2.0 development then? Is that the plan?
Yeah, we're doing that right now. So it is.
So as soon as 2.0 is out, we're going to have a book. Is that what you're promising everyone?
I hope that before 2.0 comes out, you have a book.
Ooh.
And the reason why I say that is because I hope what happens is 2.0 is released and everyone is prepared for it. Because 2.0 itself, like I said, it's a significant change, and the Angular community has addressed this largely, in a large part, after NG Europe as an emotional reaction, and then in a very thoughtful way in the past month or two. It's actually a significant change, and I think it's a great change. I think it's one that actually has to happen, and it has to happen with JavaScript frameworks in general, Angular or not, because ES6 is a significant and a very good modification of a very ugly language called JavaScript. So I think it's actually a really good change that Angular is going to undergo this 2.0 shift. But the thing is in that, as the Angular community and a lot of the Ember community has kind of globbed onto, it takes away from the work that we've, as Angular developers, have spent almost 2 years or so working on gathering this collective intelligence about how to write the best applications and how to write the most performant. Angular 2.0, I think, is like humans building the pyramids. Like for a long time we were building like little huts, and at one point we were like, well, no, we actually need to build something that is going to last. And I think Angular 2.0 is very representative of that. And so, like, to round out that question, I hope that when Angular 2.0 is released, I hope that we have this book out specifically for people who already own the ngbook 1.2 and 1.3 version as it stands today. I hope that we actually start getting that pre-released to them earlier, so we don't have those 2 months of correcting grammatical mistakes and fixing spelling errors and things like that. I hope that when Angular 2.0 is released, we have a complete shiny book. And a book that's actually endorsed by the Angular team.
Yeah.
So, which we didn't have when I first released the book. We didn't really have that, and I think I'm fairly close friends with them, with the team today, or at least the kind of the core team of the Angular core team. And I think that they see like that's a lot of the work that I like to do is in that documentation and in that story writing.
Cool. So we've also got NG newsletter, because I know you're one of the creators of that, aren't you? So how do you kind of keep up to date with that and write the book at the same time and keep an eye on Angular?
I have a very angry girlfriend sometimes because I spend more time on Angular than I do with her from week to week.
He's not watching this.
Oh wait, I hope not. I started NG Newsletter. NG Newsletter kind of competed for my time originally way back in the day before I started writing NG Book. Particularly at that time when I started writing NG Newsletter, it was more of a collection of links for myself. And then I started the newsletter and started sending out links, and it helped a lot. Like having the blog helps a lot with NG Newsletter, because I would spend sometimes up to a week writing a single article like that, the how to write the 2048 game on NG Newsletter. That took me about a week and a half to write that article. And so yes, I started NG Newsletter, and one of the things that does is it actually forces me to focus on the updates to Angular, and it forces me to keep a pulse on the Angular community and what's going on, and it also forces me to pay attention to the Angular updates, to what happens with the framework. So it's actually, as much as it's a distraction and a competitor for time, it's actually probably the single most important forcing function to keep my focus on Angular and keep the book itself up to date, because every single week I collect as many articles as I can find and read as many articles as I can find and select only the best.
So how do you maintain that pulse on the Angular community and on the Angular project itself? Like what are the things, and I think this is one of the things that our viewers are probably most interested in, is how can they stay on top of Angular and keep a pulse on the community and make sure that they're not missing out on like things that are coming out in Angular that are like a huge benefit to them potentially.
Right. So good question. Thanks. Another one that I really like answering. I feel like one of the reasons I do NG Newsletter, and I do it now, I have help with it for most of its run. I have not had any help with it, but one of the things that I hope that NG Newsletter does is it helps. One of the reasons we limit it to 6 articles and we never go past 6 articles is because we at one point we only had 3 articles in there. At one point we had 15 article lists in there, and when we had 15, our open rate was like tiny. And when we had 3, our open rate was huge, but there was just too much material to filter out. So we settled on 6, and we've been 6 for kind of a long time. One of the things that I hope, and one of the reasons I put that effort into NG Newsletter, is to do the work of filtering out the stuff that you don't need to pay attention to, and from the stuff that you should pay attention to. So the ways that I keep up with it, if you're uninterested, if our viewers are uninterested in signing up for NG Newsletter for one reason or another, the way that I keep up with it is I have a routine every single day. I check I'm in the Angular Git chat room, I'm in the IRC room, and I'm on Twitter every single day. I check specific Twitter accounts, and I check the Git updates, which is sometimes ridiculous. I check the Git updates, I walk through the source code, and I do, at the end of every single week, on Fridays and Sundays, I do a search for articles, and I spend anywhere between 1 and 6 hours or so reading on the weekend to get the latest updates. And sometimes Mondays when I go, I don't feel so strong about this week, I'll spend another couple hours reading articles and selecting the good ones versus the bad ones. I'm sorry, selecting the good ones, it's not bad ones. It's just selecting the ones that are stronger and more relevant to today than there are in the past. So
wow,
I hope...
that sounds like a lot of work. I'm glad that you do that, and I subscribe to your newsletter so I don't have to.
Yeah, it is a lot of work, and I appreciate the subscription because it's validation for I'm doing something that can help. I'm driven a lot of my internal motivation, my internal engine is focused on contribution. So where can I contribute is a question that I ask probably every single day. Where can I best contribute today? And NG Newsletter itself, it doesn't get as much love as NG Book does from the community. People don't really write and go, great, NG Newsletter is amazing. But when I do, it reinforces the fact that work is important.
Yeah, what's the
And we do have work. I don't want to. I'm sorry. I don't want to leave out. David Wu does a really good job. He's come on and helped with NG Newsletter for a couple weeks now, and he is a major help with that. And it's really fantastic to have him a part of the team. So he helps with NG Newsletter, and he's really, really good.
Cool. Well, I was going to say, what is the subscriber count, and have you seen it? Because I know you mentioned you started it way back, and has that kind of boomed as Angular's boomed, or?
Absolutely. I think we have 22,000 subscribers as of I'm looking at it right now. We have 22,990 subscribers on NG Newsletter, and we started that. Absolutely, you can look at the curve of how the newsletter itself has grown, and it's kind of almost the exact same newsletter. I'm sorry, the exact same curve as Angular's taken off.
No, it's a good. I mean, it's great stats for a single framework, isn't it? Compared to something like JavaScript Wiggly, which is the entire language of. But yeah, Angular's definitely booming. I think. Have you got any plans for let's call it a year's time, for argument's sake, like a 2.0 section, or how are you gonna? You got any thoughts on how you're gonna manage 1.3 and 2.0 stuff?
I think you're talking about in NG Book, or you're talking about in NG Newsletter?
Newsletter.
I'm not entirely certain. Again, one of the things that we do with NG Newsletter that's really important with NG Newsletter is that we do that whittling in the for the community. We tried our best to do that filtering before the newsletter goes out, so that if you only have a few minutes, even just read the headlines in Angular, or in the newsletter, you'll know what's current, what's important to pay attention to. So I'm not entirely certain how 2.0 will kind of play into that. My expectation is that 2.0 will maybe take over in a year the 1.3. Maybe we end up having a 1.2 section. Like I said, I'm not sure. We don't have any plans as of yet. We'll just have to see how that goes, I think.
Keep you even more busy.
If I could get more busy. So one thing that you mentioned was that you follow specific Twitter accounts to stay up to date, and I'm sure at least I would. Maybe I'm being selfish, but I'd be curious to know so that I can follow these Twitter accounts. What are some of the ones, just I guess off the top of your head, that you follow and make sure that you stay on top of?
So the Twitter accounts that I largely pay attention to, the Angular team itself is really good. Oh, sorry. Oh. The Angular team itself is really good. Um wow, I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. So I'm looking through my Twitter accounts. Dan Wallin is really good. I really like him. I mean, I like him as a person, and I like him as I like his work as a person. So definitely, if it were up to me, I would say definitely follow those two. AngularJS News is actually really good. It's a solid one as well. And Max Lynch, I'm also just a friend of Max Lynch, or he's a friend of mine. So, um, and then I also really like Pascal Precht, the author of Angular Translate. So those are the ones that I definitely pay attention to, probably the most.
Cool. Yeah, maybe you could make a list or something and share that with people. I think people find that valuable.
That's probably a good idea. Another thing that I've thought about in the past, JavaScript Daily is also another really good one. That one, if you're not on their newsletter, and you're writing in JavaScript, get on it. It's really good. I'm a really big fan of functional languages also, so JavaScript Daily does a good job of covering my functional appetite, so to speak. So yeah. Anyway,
Awesome.
that's where I'm at.
So is there anything else before we're kind of coming down to the end of our show? But is there anything that you wanted to talk about specifically that could help our user or our viewers stay on top of the changes that come in Angular, or maybe are there any changes that have happened in the past that really kind of threw you for a loop as far as NG Book or NG Newsletter, or anything else that you wanted to talk about before we go to questions?
You know, I think probably one of the things that gets lost in the Angular community is we tend to focus a lot on as a community, we tend to focus on what is Angular doing and what changes are Angular are what changes are Angular going to affect me, and how is like Angular itself, how's my work going to be changed by Angular, and the Angular community is very insular, and I think my best advice for developers, and this comes a lot with this advice is largely architected by my experience with working with young developers, is try not to just be insular and like solely focused on what Angular brings, but largely what the JavaScript community brings. So kind of we were talking before we were live about React, and I think React, there are things that we can learn from React as Angular developers, or even use React inside of Angular, which I think is actually really interesting, or also vice versa, using Angular inside of React components. I think it's really interesting. I think that using things like Flux or RxJS is really cool if you haven't looked into it. It's really, really neat, and it's by Microsoft, which was really surprising. But anyway, that's a totally different conversation. I try not to say so insular just to Angular. I try to be as, funneling with what's going on with JavaScript in general. So as a community, I think we can do that better. I think we can see what other things are going on that other people are having success with, and integrate that into our work. And like I said, we try to do that. We try to do that today. Or I try to do that with my professional work also.
I think that's terrific advice. Like, especially in the Angular community, I've noticed a lot of people get their first taste at programming in general through Angular, and that sort of makes sense because it's easy to just like build a simple HTML only app with Angular, and so I see a lot of boot camps and stuff start with Angular, and I think you can really miss out if you aren't keeping your eyes open to, like, Angular is actually a JavaScript framework, and it's not a language. Like, it's, I mean, like, that's arguable with the templating language. But anyway, I think it's just very valuable to consider the other, like, the core JavaScript in general, and what other frameworks are doing as well.
So one thing that I do want to mention, I just ended up on the Google Plus page. These are things that are actually kind of important that I maybe misspoke or left out earlier. EchoJS is a really good resource. Antonio shared this. It's a really, really good resource for keeping up with things in JavaScript. And the other one is Angular 2.0. I know I say with I said before that Angular 2.0 is ES6. It's not actually true. It's not that it's limited to ES6. It actually should be. It will work in with ES5, the current version of JavaScript. We're focusing it. The book itself is likely going to take the approach that it's ES6 based. Everything that you're doing in ES5, if the JavaScript of today, if you're writing your work in ES5 and you don't have the time or you don't want to learn ES6, that's okay. Angular 2.0 should still work. The plan is that it will still work with ES5. So thanks, Cameron, for reminding me of that.
Sweet. Awesome. So is there anything else that you want to discuss before we go into some of these this Q&A from our viewers?
Come and visit in San Francisco.
Awesome. Are you going to be, just out of curiosity, you're going to be at NGConf, right? Are you speaking?
I am speaking. Okay, I'm speaking on machine learning and Angular, I believe.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead. We have 4 questions. I think we could probably get through them all before our time's up. So, Todd, do you want to alternate? You can go ahead and on the first one.
This one's really long. What Angular books would you want to see made by the community? Let's say you might not have time to write yourself. Are there any areas that are lacking in the Angular learning resource ecosystem? That's a mighty question.
That is a fantastic question. I'm actually, I was looking through these questions before we started, and I checked Mark. These are great questions on every single one of them because they're really very thoughtful. So what Angular books would I like to see made by the community? I think there's a really, really good. So I also, one of the things that I do professionally is I teach Angular, along with teaching other JavaScript and some back-end work with. Sorry, my dog is barking downstairs. One of the questions that we get asked all the time is how should we be structuring our applications? And I think that there are good resources around that, and I think that I don't necessarily know if this is actually a book itself, as more as a guideline, and there's a couple of good guidelines out there that exist as this. But we get this question so much so that I don't think that answer is pervasive enough. And I have my opinions about how I write Angular how I write and structure Angular applications, and I think that I have probably half of a chapter that I wanted to add at one point to ngBook, and kind of realized that adding my opinions about that may or may not be the right approach to keeping Angular, the ngBook itself, relevant to everybody. Alternatively, another way of thinking about that is maybe the Angular community does need that. Maybe they do need this. This is how you do it. This is how you structure that. This is how you structure an Angular application to be solid for the future. So that's definitely a thought. That's definitely a place where a book could help, or a resource could help. And I think that we do have a couple of them, but largely that's probably the biggest component of Angular that I think is missing even today, even still having good guides about how to structure an Angular application. The other one, which this is uh, uh, I have time to write this ish, and the reason why I say that is because I have been writing it. I have about a 80 video long course on how to build mobile apps with Ionic and Angular, and I think that was mostly written and shot to answer the question, how do you build mobile apps with Angular, and that was originally written without Ionic. Ionic came out. We started working with the Ionic team and rewrote it to match that, and that is going to come out sometime early next month or mid next month. Kind of really excited about that one because we built a WhatsApp clone in it.
Oh wow, that's ambitious. That's cool.
Yeah, I have 55 videos shot. The way that we architected that one is I wrote a book and then I shot the videos and then I updated the book as we were shooting the videos, so things that have changed and whatnot. So that one's, I'm actually super proud of that, and it's like another 200-page book alongside 80 video training course. So I'm kind of proud of that one.
Cool. All right, so I'm gonna try really hard not to slaughter this name. It's Olivier Combes, right? I think because I slaughtered his name last time, and if I got it wrong, you can tell me at NGNL next month when I see you there. Huh?
You still
I still slaughtered it?
I didn't get it.
Yeah, that's true. It's been four episodes. I still can't say it. Okay, so here's the question from Olivier. How long does it take you to write one newsletter? You kind of touched on this a little bit, but
it depends week from week. Sometimes some weeks it can take anywhere between an hour and 3 hours, and some weeks it takes probably a whole working day to get through one. Again, like I see our role in the community is doing a lot of that filtering, so you don't have to. So like I said, it just depends on the week. Another thing is if you're interested in getting into NG Newsletter as a viewer, if you've written something you're really proud of, you've written something that you think is really good for the community, send it, like tweet at us at NG Newsletter or send us an email at us@fullstack.io, and we'll, if it's good, we'll just include it right away. If it could need some help, then we'll send you back some suggestions and we can get you in there as well. And that, like I said, we have about 22,090 subscribers to NG Newsletter, so it's kind of a lot of eyes to get on your article if you're interested.
Cool. Right, third question. I feel I've got a pretty solid handle on some of the more common Angular concepts, including services and custom directives. What's a good area of exploration after this?
Right, another good question. I think you kind of have to ask yourself why you want to explore more. If you're focused solely on Angular, you're focused on, you want to know what the next thing that you should focus on as an Angular developer, I think routing and the modular system is probably the next logical place that you need to go. When we write our Angular apps, everything is a module. I have sidebar modules, navbar modules, a little login module, things that I reuse between app to app. I contain those in a module system. If you're talking about as a developer, if you're interested in focusing on what is going to make you the best developer, I think, and prepared for the future, I think ECMAScript 6 is write a toy application with no framework in ECMAScript 6. It's really, really nice. It'll help a lot with future for future development. It'll get you prepared for what comes next in web development. I think AppScript is also really interesting. I'm kind of a fan of typed languages. You may not be a fan of typed languages. That's okay. AppScript, you can write AppScript that untyped AppScript and it still works. I I think taking the time to look at React.js is really, it's probably a really good idea. React has a lot of really interesting ideas, and I think a lot of those ideas are going to be wrapped into Angular in the future. Two more suggestions. I think Pouch is a really, really interesting. And as a community, we're kind of lacking a lot of like offline support for our applications, and that's something that we've done kind of a lot of work in, and I think we're probably going to extract that work and put it into the community itself. I think that's a really interesting place as a developer to expand. And then finally, anything functional. If you want to be a Power developer, learn ClojureScript. ClojureScript is awesome.
I always feel like a noob whenever I like talk to people who know a lot of things. Like there's so much to learn, and like yeah, all the things that you mentioned, I've got so much work to do. It's a little intimidating sometimes, honestly, but that's kind of the exciting part of our industry as well.
Yeah, there's always something you don't know about, and there's always someone doing it who's better at it than you are. And I just try to keep that in mind always. I also try not to be the smartest person. I try to be the dumbest person in the room, which means I'm surrounded by smarter people. So
cool.
I just
all right.
spit on my computer screen. Sorry.
Nice. TMI. All right. So with our last question is from Carlos from Costa Rica. With zero knowledge, what is the best place to build a strong foundation to create robust and maintainable applications? What are the best compatible libraries, frameworks, etc. That we should be using with it? I think they're referring to Angular. Or should we restrain from this?
So I'm not entirely certain. This question is a little bit difficult to answer. It's a good question, and I understand the motivation of it. And it's difficult to answer because it depends on your use. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to write an application for someone like Virgin America, you probably want to focus on using what's right. Well, I mean, this question actually, what I'm about to answer is like the answer for everybody. Use what's right for your team. Use what makes the most sense for what you're doing. If you're writing something for Virgin America, 1.2 is a safe bet. If you're writing something that you plan on releasing next year, ES6 AppScript is probably a good bet. Using a tracer to support ES5 is a good place to start. A good place to create a robust, future-proof application, so to speak. I can say without a doubt my opinion of the best Angular libraries to use out there are UI Router is fantastic. If you're not using UI Router, I highly suggest you start using it. It is fantastic. It makes the development much more maintainable, and it allows you to do modular applications very easily. It's fantastic. Use UI Router for sure. I recently switched about a couple weeks ago to System.js, and System.js is like it supports the required JS and the common JS and the AMD modular structure of applications out of the box, and it allows you to write ES6 files along with ES5 files, and it does everything is lazily loaded, and it works beautifully with Gulp. I can say I haven't not looked back since switching to System.js. So System.js will help you future-proof your application as well.
All right. I think that's all the questions that we had. So we'll just go with a couple closing announcements. Again, big thank you to ReactWeek.com for sponsoring us, and NG Newsletter today, incidentally. Yeah, definitely take a look at React.com. Again, we have our next show on the 27th of January with the Conf organizers. And one thing that we didn't mention earlier, but we're super stoked for, is we're going to NGNL. That's a conference in the Netherlands for Angular. And so we're going to do a on-site live broadcast at NGNL with some of the speakers and organizers there. It's going to be a blast. So yeah, follow us on Twitter to get updates to that. And
That's
as
totally
always,
awesome, by the way.
sorry, what?
I didn't mean to interrupt your announcements, but that's totally awesome. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked as well. Are you going? So you're going to NGNL?
I'm not. I'm not. That'd be fun though, but I'm not.
Yeah, I'll be there, so yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so I think that's everything. Is there any last words for the community before we stop this broadcast?
I think just stay being awesome. Actually, the Angular community is one of the reasons why I put a lot of this work and I spend a lot of my time with it. I'm really enjoying it. Also, thanks to you, Kent, and Todd for inviting me here. I've had a fun hour.
Pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I guess we'll see you in 2 weeks with the NGConf organizers. Ciao.
Cool. Bye.